Welcome back to another podcast episode. This is the Mental Toughness Podcast. As always, this is Matt Phillips. So excited to be with you today to introduce you to this next guest. Now, a little background. I was actually introduced to the CrossFit world about 7 years ago and did it for a good number of years, actually until recently when I stopped to focus on this ultra marathon that I have coming up here in a few weeks. But CrossFit, if you've ever heard me talk about how do you place yourself in an environment where you have the greatest chance of success, CrossFit was it for me, right? Instead of working out alone, I found CrossFit, and I found that I had my baseball team, right? Obviously not a baseball team, but it was the environment where I had my team. They were pushing me, I was pushing them, and I got in the best shape of my life doing CrossFit, as a matter of fact. Now, because I was part of this community, right, because they're this gigantic worldwide community of people focused on their fitness, focused on nutrition and health, you start to hear certain names around the CrossFit Games and in this world. And that's why I'm so excited, because one of the names that I had heard about, that I had read about, watched on television, is my guest today, Jason Khalipa. Jason is one who's got an absolutely fascinating background. And for those of you familiar with CrossFit, I'm sure you've heard his name. For those not, that's okay as well. You can know that CrossFit was part of his life. It continues to this day, but he is one of the most well-rounded individuals that I've ever come across. Now, Jason was an 8-time competitor in the CrossFit Games, did very, very well during his time there, of course. But there's so much more to him, right? He's a devoted father. He's a global businessman. He is an author. He's done some pretty incredible things. Just to give you some insight into this, Jason started CrossFit Santa Clara back in 2010, I believe. He's now opened 20 more locations. I mean, it's incredible, right? And not just like in Santa Clara, but all over the world. I mean, all throughout North America, Mexico, the United States, also over in the Asia Pacific region, right? He's got places in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Japan. He's done some pretty incredible things. He's got this passion for creating this healthier workforce. So he's got this workplace wellness initiative. So if you're out there and looking for a wellness program for your company, this could be it for you, working with Jason and his team. But they've got, accounts like Twitter and GoPro, and just focused on how do we get healthier, fitter employees and get them moving, right? CrossFit's based on nutrition and movement, and he's taking that now to the workplace. He is a father as well. I mean, I can go on and on, but probably the most impactful, we touch on this during the podcast, is back in January of 2016, his daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. And it has ignited this passion in him and his wife to spread awareness about pediatric cancer and raise money for kids with cancer. I mean, he's done some pretty amazing things over his time. And of course, he's got his book, As Many Reps as Possible. There's a link below this podcast in the show notes, in the video below this video if you're watching that instead. But we dive into this AMRAP mentality, as many reps as possible, a big CrossFit term that he has written a book about how he manages his time, his life, and squeezes the value out of it based on this as many reps as possible mentality. And you get a glimpse into kind of what separates him from everyone else. So I could go on and on, but I won't. Let me get to the podcast. And without further ado, let me please introduce you to the one and only Jason Khalipa.
Hey, Jen, thanks so much for taking your time. Happy to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I'm stoked to chat with you and happy to be here.
Yeah, this will be a blast. I mean, there's so much to dive into, and I've got a list of questions to ask you and kind of dive into your mind a little bit. And, I like to kind of open these podcasts with kind of one question and get your perspective on and get your gut reaction. But before we get into your background, how would you define someone who is mentally tough, someone who has a strong mindset? What comes to mind for you?
Oh gosh, that's like a big one to start her out.
You bet.
Yeah, I think mental toughness above all else is not allowing external circumstances to determine your next step. So staying true to that internal compass and not letting adversity stop you, but continuing to move through it and figure out what's on the other side.
That's awesome. And, obviously with your background and, I'll put links to your website and all that stuff, but for the listeners, I mean, your background's it's pretty amazing, right? From, you're one of the pioneers in the sport of half-pipe skiing. You're a 5-time winter X Games medalist. I mean, you've won basically every competition in your sport, X Games, World Ski Invitationals, do tours, like all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
You've done some pretty amazing things, pardon the pun, on the Amazing Race, finishing top 3. So,
Yeah.
and you founded Escapade with your husband, and you've got a phenomenal background of working through different kind of areas. It sounds like working through adversity, working through injuries, things of that nature. One of the big things that sticks out to me as I look at your background is I know you had this kind of dream of winning that Olympic gold.
Yeah.
Right? Back in 2014, I know like knee injury kind of took you out and kind of cut your career short and stuff. And that led to a lot of different transitions. But can you take us through kind of like what that was like? And then I think the key thing is like this mental toughness, this mindset to kind of start over almost, right? And work through that, just like that adversity you talked about.
Yeah. So which part do you want me to address? The Olympics part, the not getting there, that kind of.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Okay. So that in the moment sucked really bad. It was really a pretty devastating experience at the time. And I think my perspective on the purpose of goals was a little different in my younger years. And I have a kind of renewed outlook on the purpose of goals in our life now. But in the moment, I mean, the Olympics were everything that I had worked for and I believed was the most important thing that I could do. So to have put, 15, 16 years of competing and a 16-year goal out there, and every waking moment of every day, I was working toward that goal, and to get so close and have had so much success leading up to it. And, my banner year was 2010. And if our sport had been in the Olympics in 2010, this story might be very different. But that wasn't in the cards. So not going to the Olympics, when I didn't go because I can't guarantee I would have qualified for the team, because the US is the most competitive nation to qualify for the Olympics. Sure. In that sport. We just have, in the top 10 at the time, I think we had 6 American athletes and we could only send 4. The Olympics has a cap on how many athletes per discipline you can send. So I had to basically be in the top 4 in the world. Yes. In order to go, which I had done many times before, but I was coming back from a major knee injury. And in our first Olympic qualifying event, I landed a 900, so 2.5 rotations, and I landed a little low in the half pipe, which means I probably fell from, the air about 30 feet or so when my feet touched back down on the ground. And I ended up tearing my left ACL, meniscus, and cartilage, which was at the time my good knee. It was not the knee I was coming back from. And it was simultaneously relieving and simultaneously devastating, but there was a concreteness about it where you didn't have this anticipation and this question of whether or not you were going to do it. It was just like, okay, now it's over. And for so long, like I was just battling through so much to even put myself in a contending position. And That was a lot of work and caused a lot of stress. And you can actually see it in my skin in photographs, like the stress that I was under. I was just breaking out terribly, and terribly for me, this is all relative.
Right. Of course.
but I think it's just representative of the amount of stress that like trying to work through and to get your body back into a position where I think internally, my body and my heart was like, I don't think we want to be taking this kind of risk anymore. So in some ways there were two parts of me, one that was in and my ego was in and continuing that pursuit. But other parts of me were ready to move on. So when that accident happened, there was a wave of relief and then also a huge wave of disappointment.
That's really interesting because when you have when you have that pursuit, I mean, I've never heard it described that way, this sense of relief, but also that disappointment, right? I honestly have never heard anyone kind of talk about it that way, but it's almost, talk to me about the stress that you were under, because was that external stress from coaches, from parents, like kind of pushing you, saying like, no, you've worked so hard for this that you need to get back and you felt like you had to get back? Or was that coming more internal of expectations of others? Where did that stress come from?
It was entirely internal. It was entirely self-created. I mean, I'm sure people on the outside had their own opinions, but I've not, it wasn't really for me at that point. Like, I just had worked for so many years to make this happen. And to give you like a little more background, my illustrious and successful career was also riddled with a lot of injuries.
Yes.
And a few years prior to this, in 2011, I took a crash that really changed me mentally for the rest of my career, that I never was able to come back from completely. Physically, I healed perfectly fine from it and went on to be stronger than ever after that crash. But mentally, I was suddenly aware that there is always an element that's out of our control. And that belief can be good and it can be bad. But unless you're willing to surrender to that piece that is out of your control, it doesn't lead you to perform very well. And I was also in denial that I had this belief. So I was operating from a place of like, my sport finally got into the Olympics the summer after that injury.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, well, you finally have your shot. Like, you got to get better. You have to heal. You have to not have this fear. You have to keep believing it's all in your control and you can make it happen. And that same time, the year before that, Kevin Pierce had an accident. He's a snowboarder. He had an accident in a half pipe and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And I had gone to high school with him and I knew him before, and I watched him in recovery, and it really freaked me out. I was like, I didn't quite realize the extent of what could happen to us, you know, and still at that time, like he was doing a double cork. So it was like a trick that I wasn't even thinking about doing. And it was a relatively new and dangerous trick. So I still was like, okay, well, you know, maybe that just comes with like pushing it that hard. And I was kind of able to dismiss it. And then that following winter, when I had this crash, and I was like, that was a trick that I, in my mind, had on lock, that I landed all the time.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, I made a tiny minor error, and it ended up having massive consequences. And it was the first time I felt totally out of control. Like, I couldn't keep myself safe while I was crashing. And I'm like, I always was able to look back on injuries and accidents and be like, well, what could I have done different to prevent this? And I didn't have an answer this time. And that's what freaked me out. I didn't know how I could prevent that from happening. But then my sport gets in the Olympics. So the ego-driven, goal-oriented part of me is like, well, no, you have to keep going, because now you actually have your chance now. So I kind of pushed back through that injury and got back on the horse and started training and competing again, but didn't address that fear. I didn't say it out loud to anybody until almost a year later. I was talking to my sister before leaving for a training camp, and I said, I just don't want to end up like Kevin Pierce. It was the first time I had said it out loud. And I went to Breckenridge for a team camp, and woke up in the morning not feeling well, slept in a little bit later, finally went out to train. And after the half pipe runs, skiing back down to the lift, I just decided to start hitting the jumps a little bit. Did that a few times, and then it warmed up and the speed changed, and I hit a jump and I came up like a few feet short of the landing, which means I went like 70 feet to flat, and destroyed my right knee. And when I was in the hospital getting an MRI, which I already knew, like I knew this knee was beyond done. And it was, I fractured my femur. I think my tibial plateau as well. I tore cartilage, meniscus, my posterior lateral corner, and my ACL in that one accident. And as I was waiting to get the MRI, I got a call from a friend of mine, another skier, yes. And she said that Sarah Burke had a crash in the Park City Halfpipe and lost like blood supply to her brain for 20 minutes. And I was like completely gutted and just confused and bewildered and conflicted. And Sarah ended up not surviving her accident. And it was just this bizarre dynamic of having a goal that you believe to be the most important thing, and then watching what that same goal yes. did to other people. Like,
yes.
But still, I was too focused on the goal and I kept going. So that's where the stress came from, right? Like I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't think it was worth it. I didn't want to be there. And other people had their own choices to make, and other people decided for themselves that they did want to be there and they wanted to continue. And other people were able to have, I mean, almost everyone in the sport knew those two people. Like I wasn't unique in that regard, but for yes. some reason, just my view of it, just it completely changed me. And I tried to manage the fear. I did every technique, sports psych technique under the sun to get back and to heal and to put myself in a position where I might be able to qualify for the team. And I was doing it, but it was just, everything was so forced.
Yes.
I was not in flow state in any of it. There was zero flow from that point on. At least not when I was trying to get myself to do nines again, which is what my bad crash happened on.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because do you think like age had something to do with it? So as you matured, as you just got a little bit older, you were noticing more of those things? Or maybe when you were earlier not paying attention to the crashes, being like, is what it is, get back up, go again. Did awareness increase or?
I mean, it was like, I've always been pretty aware. There was certainly an awareness increase, but it really was, to me, it was that, the shift in belief system. And I think the latter belief was always the case. There's always an element that's not in our control.
Yes.
That was always true, but I had controlled my environment and my training and my mindset and like created these results that I gave myself enough kind of superficial external evidence to believe that I was the one in control all that time.
Yes. And
when I lost that belief and I didn't value the potential reward enough to continue taking the risk, like I was continuing in some ways to take the risk, but I was also operating from a place that was always holding myself back just a little bit, not wanting to fully surrender to the powers that be. And that in that surrender is really where your best athleticism and expression comes out. I mean, it is that flow state. And I never allowed myself to get back there. I kept it all within what I knew I could do and control. And then like that edge where progression happens, I couldn't go there anymore.
Well, it's fascinating because our relationship with fear is it rules everything. Right. And I think that's in business relationships. I can't imagine throwing tricks like you have thrown in the past.
I can't either.
I know. And it amazes me every time I watch like skiing or boarding like that to see the spins and twists. And I can't even fathom putting that together. Right. I'm happy doing my carving down the slopes. And with 3 kids now, worrying about like, oh, I don't want to get hurt because, you know, even carving, like, my goodness.
Yeah.
But it's that fear-based, even for me, right? As I'm skiing these not difficult slopes, right?
Yep.
But that impact that it could make. What, you know, it's interesting, like when you were trying to force it, because I think we try to do that a lot, right? Where we're, you know, it's like mind over matter. It's, no, I believe, and you try to like override it, but you're constantly holding back. What sort of things were you doing to kind of force it? And what was the self-talk like in your head as you're like approaching that trick, or, you know, you have to do that trick? What was that kind of like for you?
So it's interesting because the approach really was the same before and after that injury. But there was an underlying like fear that I wasn't willing to acknowledge and look at, because had I acknowledged it and looked at it, I would have made the choice to retire earlier. And so I think that that's like the key difference. And I still managed to do 9s again. So I still managed to like overcome the fear of that trick. Ironically, that was the same trick that the crash that like altered my mindset forever was on a 9. And then the crash that ended my Olympic journey was also a 9.
Really?
So I got myself back to doing them. But interestingly, learning that trick is also what allowed me to win X Games when I won X Games.
Right.
You know, so it's like it's so fascinating. But the process that I used to manage fear, previously, and I still do, like, well, I guess the piece of acknowledging it initially
It's huge.
helps.
Oh, Matt, you have to do that, right?
Yeah, you have to do
you
that.
have to call it out. You have to identify it. You've got to give it a name.
Yeah. And so I start by acknowledging what it is that I'm scared of, like in that moment. And I did that before and after. I didn't acknowledge the deeper fear later, which actually I think was less about like getting injured, but this other fear of like not wanting to be a quitter, like not wanting to get up, like make the comeback and achieve the goal, right? Like, oh, you're not strong enough. You're not tough enough. You're not resilient enough to overcome this. When in reality, I had all the tools to do it, but I no longer wanted to.
Yes.
And I was making myself be there. So that was the distinction. But acknowledging what you're afraid of in the moment, exploring kind of that like realistic worst case scenario.
Yes.
Like what can go wrong? And then shifting from that to, okay, well, if that's true, what can I do to ensure that doesn't happen? What steps do I need to take? And then shifting from the focus on the limiting factors to the factors that are possible and to how you can make it happen. And then visualization. And I've been practicing visualization in a sports setting since I was about 16 years old. And visualizing until you can see and feel your body executing the trick or whatever it is that you're working toward, until you can see yourself doing that flawlessly and effortlessly. And then you open your eyes and I take a few deep breaths and exhale and bring myself down a little bit. And then it's just like the whole world disappears and it's just me and what I'm about to do, and I go and do it. And most likely it's going to be 90% successful. And then from there you work on refining that 10% to make it perfect.
It's so interesting. It's almost like a risk assessment almost, right? Where it's, what are the risks involved? So what's the fear, first of all, because you do have to call it out. And then risk assess it. What's in your control? What's out of your control? And then you're assessing what level of risk am I willing to live with? Yeah. Which is out of my control, and like go, right? Play the scenario out in your head to prepare to position yourself to be successful. And then if you're still at a point where it's like the risk is worth it, then you go into the jump or do whatever.
There's fear, but I still want to do this. Then it's just, you get to a point where you just have to commit and then cultivate courage and then take action. And then through that action, you develop a capability. And when that capability develops further by more repetition, that's when you get to a place of confidence.
Yes.
And in my best year, like the confidence was just through the roof, and my belief in myself, like it was just ridiculous. Like I wasn't trying to believe. Like I just knew I would show up and I would do my run and I'd land and I'd probably win. And it was an amazing feeling. Didn't last very long.
Oh no, absolutely. Right. And what do you think, like when you're in that period, that state where things are just working so well, right? There's the confidence within you. Have you pinpointed like what that was that led you to that kind of like confidence level?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of the combination of that process, but also like at the time it was sort of it's like a perfect storm. Everything had to be that way, because if there was another athlete who was better than me at that time, my confidence wouldn't have like externally been the same, because I wouldn't have been winning. Someone else would have been winning.
Yes.
So I was doing all the things, but in reality, I'd been doing all the things for a while and other people were better. And that was true after. Like the work that I was putting in the process was kind of the same. But in this particular year, like the judges were on my side and I was still doing the work and showing up and landing the runs and doing what I was capable of to the best of my ability and letting that be enough. And I was constantly in flow state at that point. And then the next year I learned a new trick and I was kind of like continuing that momentum, but the judges weren't as much on my side. And then the ego kicked in because I was so feeling like that, that year of winning everything and having the world tell me how great I was, that they were right. And that only in that year when I was winning was I great. I was great all along. I was great after, like we all are.
Yes.
And then the next year, I just kept waiting for the results and for the other people to tell me. And that started to like deteriorate me a little bit. And that's when that led up to that crash. Like I was like, I need to win. It was just like it was not a great place to be coming from. And it led to a really scary crash.
That's such an interesting point. I was interviewing a guy a couple weeks back, and we talk about this concept of, giving your best effort. Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned that, right? To the best of your ability were the words that you used.
Yep.
And we were talking about it, and he said, his focus was like, how do I, run his best race, right? And this, I don't know, that wording can be used as an excuse or a truth. Meaning like, right. I gave it my best. It's like, did you? Like maybe, or it depends how you say it and in what context. And it sounds like to me, like when you're in that flow state, it's like, that was the best I could have done with each trick, each run, whatever. That's literally, I did my best. And internally you knew that was your best and the results just showed up as they did, right? Judges favoring you, stuff like that. Was that shift where it was like, oh, maybe that wasn't my best. What do they think? And kind of
so that my best year was also coming back from an injury. Mm-hmm. And my whole rehab process was just so focused. Like I didn't have any question as to whether or not I was going to get back and be able to ski. And I hadn't started winning everything. Like I had won an event here and there. I'd been on a lot of podiums, but I still hadn't won X Games. It was still the most important event. It was still my biggest goal. And I got second the previous year. So I was so close and I could taste it. And I'm like, I know that I can do this. I know I have what it takes. And I just spent every day visualizing the run that I wanted to get back to doing while I was rehabbing from this injury. And so coming in, I felt like I had nothing to lose. And I then won a lot. And every event was like, I was just so happy to be back out skiing and to be skiing at this level again. And it worked and the judges loved it. And then that shifted that next year. And I remember I put a lot of weight on my shoulders that year for a lot of reasons. My dad was also, after my 2010 season, I learned that my dad had been diagnosed with leukemia. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to ski for him, and to like continue to win for him. And in hindsight, like what inspired my dad more than anything was my persistence and my willingness to fight through adversity. And I actually, earlier today, stumbled upon an old email from my dad talking about that exact thing, and just saying how me fighting through injury after injury and coming back and continuing to fight for my goal and dream was a big inspiration to him in his own recovery and his own battle.
Yes.
And that, that's what people remember, and that's what people care about. And it's not actually what events you won in the end that they admire about you, which was a huge lesson for me to learn, because in many situations, the world, the external world, outside of your friends and family and the ones who truly know who you are, the outside world tells you that you are more important and more valuable and worth more when you are winning everything.
Yes.
There's more opportunities, they pay you more, and it's a really toxic thing, because like we've talked about this whole podcast and at the beginning of this, is there is always a piece that is out of your control. Yes. And if you are always waiting for that external final result to determine whether or not it was worth it, you were worth it, whether you're doing the right thing or not the right thing, like you're going to be waiting your entire life.
Yes.
Your entire life.
What are you most proud of in your career, your skiing career?
I am most, winning X Games was one of the happiest moments of my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud of that achievement. But now being retired for 4 years mm-hmm. and navigating that whole murky sea, yes. What is starting to reveal to me is that the most important thing that I did in my ski career was to be a voice and to share the learnings as I was learning them, and to be a good person, to like treat people well. That is the most important thing that I did in my entire ski career, that has opened doors post athletic career that otherwise would not be there. It's the most important thing I did.
See, that's amazing. It's really interesting to me, and this happens in the business world. I think it happens in athletics everywhere in the world, is like we constantly look for that third-party validation, as if a fan or someone outside of my true like sphere of influence, right? My circle of trust, whatever you want to call it. We look for that external validation when it starts with us, right? It starts with, am I proud of my effort? Am I proud of like how I'm, climbing back, or how I dealt with that? And building that up inside. And I think that's where I see a lot. That's where I get in trouble, frankly, is when I start looking at that instead of looking in the mirror every day being like, did I do everything I could today? And not killing myself, not working 50 hours in a 24-hour period, right? But did I focus on the right things to move the needle? And if I can answer solidly yes and look myself in the mirror and say that, then that's a good day. And I think when you're young, you don't understand that, right? I didn't.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the question of like, do I believe in what I did today?
Yes.
Like, do I want to repeat that? And that's what matters more. And we wait for other people's approval, and and then it's just so easy to start living for other people. And that's when, that's the fast track to not feeling fulfilled and happy in whatever it is that you're doing in your life.
Yeah. It's so interesting how that definition shifts. The other thing that really stuck out to me, which during your best year, coming off an injury, making your way back, you said that you were just so happy to be out there. Mm-hmm. So appreciative of that opportunity. I found that I was, cut my freshman year from collegiate baseball, and then after not having touched a ball for a year, tried out again, made the team, and that opened up a European opportunity for me and all this stuff. But I remember the appreciation I had and like the fire inside me just to be out there, because I was so happy to have another opportunity to play. And that carried through for the next 3 years I played collegiately, and then when I was playing professionally overseas, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big struggle for a lot of athletes and a lot of business people, is we lose the passion. Like we're like, I don't even care about being here anymore.
Yeah. And I think we lose the passion because we start focusing on trying to manipulate the external result and other people's approval and opinion of us, and making coaches happy and doing all this stuff that's like, it's not actually what I want to do. And that, like, I mean, that was also a contributing factor once we got, once our sport got into the Olympics. We all of a sudden had national team support, and we had a coach, and this was, 8 years into my professional career at this point.
Yes.
And they're like, okay, now you have to do everything on our schedule, and you have to travel with these people that you haven't been traveling or training with for the last 8 years. And you have to work with this coach who had nothing to do with your current success. And
Yes.
like, they shake up this whole entire thing. And I was trying to be like, oh, okay, great. We have a US team now. Like, let's play by their rules. And it just went against all things that resonated with me and that had led to my success up until that point. And they're like, let's just change it all before the Olympics. That makes a lot of sense. Terrible idea.
Yes. Go away from what works. No, this is better, Jen. Come on.
Exactly. The belief that someone else knows better. They don't. You know better. We're the only ones that can know truly what is the best for us. And it's different with an individual sport. And there are, of course, certain things like a half pipe's not open at 10 p.m. So if like my peak hour is 10 p.m., I'm going to have to figure out a different hour to train. And it's different for team sports where you have to all be on that same program, but you still know, even in a team sport setting, you still know if like how the like workouts that complement your actual sport specific training are complementing what you're doing on the field. And it doesn't always work for people, but they feel obliged. So they keep showing up. That's
so true. Well, and it's such an interesting shift now we're having in the business world where everything's going, much more trending towards much more flexible, like work from home, like flexible work arrangements, all this sort of stuff. Right. And, a lot of it has to do with kind of younger generations coming up and setting different expectations and all that stuff. But it's an interesting point actually of like, if we take true ownership of like when we know we perform best because we've been in that situation for a long time, why wouldn't we put ourselves in that position instead of working 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever, and being forced into the model, having more of that flexibility.
Exactly. Yeah. And in a perfect, like the example when I talked about when I hurt my knee, that we were at a team training camp in Breckenridge, they got private pipe time. Ooh, we have private pipes now because we have a national team. Like I had trained with the public my entire life. Like it's fine. But they had private pipe time, but it was at 8 a.m. And if you know anything about winter, like it's not very sunny at 8 a.m. It's cold, especially if you're in Breckenridge. There's no sunshine out yet. Like the pipe was in the shade. Most ski resorts are north facing, so it's really dark. And like, I like waking up early, but I like sitting on my couch and drinking coffee for a while. And then, like warming up and kind of just making my way out there by 11.
Yes.
And they were like, oh, but it's private and there's sled laps. And it's like, I'd rather stay out longer, ride the chairlift, not have back-to-back-to-back laps, have a little rest in between each run, and ski with the public. Like, I'd rather do that. So anyway, that was kind of it.
Well, it's interesting too, because it's, I mean, like X Games world, right? And going down the half pipe and all this stuff, right? It's a different like person that's going through. So it's like, why are you forcing somebody to do something they're not used to at all? It's going to backfire at some point.
Yep.
That's so fascinating. So I want to see if you can explain this to me. What is it like dropping in and hitting like one of those tricks? Like, can you describe the feeling? Like, what is it? I would never do that. So
it's like, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, when I do my risk assessment, I'm like, that's not worth it. So
yes.
But is there a way to describe it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also agree now that for me and my current ability levels, it's no longer worth it. But I didn't start by doing 900s. Like I started by learning how to ride the transition of a half pipe, and then by getting air out of it, and then working on tricks outside of a half pipe, and then adding the trick into the half pipe. So there's a lot, there's a lot of like progression that takes place before you see that. But to describe it, like, when you're on a swing,
Mm-hmm.
so going through transition feels like you're on a swing, but for most people, like that moment of weightlessness before they come back down, like that's kind of like the freaky moment.
Yes.
But with Halfpipe, you're on the swing. And then right before that moment of weightlessness, you actually push off of the lip and you set your trick. So you're doing your trick in that moment of weightlessness, but you've set it into motion. So like you've controlled it and you navigate through the trick in the air. And when you land, it's exactly like going back down a swing on the other side. Like that's the closest I could make, that pumping, swinging motion is really what it feels like. And you feel all that pressure and the G-forces, like the centrifugal force underneath you as you're riding up that wall. And it is so fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, I try to describe like hitting a baseball perfectly. And unless you've done it, you can't. It's really hard to describe.
Yeah.
But that swing, I'm going through the visualization now of it. When you're talking, I'm actually picturing myself on a swing going through it. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I think that's an interesting thing too, of like, you feel so helpless, out of control on a swing, right? Just because you're weightless for a little bit, right?
Right. And the
millisecond.
Chain soften up there and then they clank when you come back down. By popping and setting your trick, you avoid that part.
Yep. That's exactly right. Oh, so you're in more control than you think. Exactly.
But when things go wrong in a halfpipe, it is kind of like you went too big on the swing and you had that spooky, scary moment. You're like, how am I going to make it back down to the earth? Yeah.
True. Fight or flight response kicks in and there you go. That's amazing. Yeah. What you've done, again, that's just a whole different world, which I find absolutely fascinating. You've now obviously, you've been retired for a couple of years now. You now are focusing on working with athletes as they transition to that life after sports, right? Yeah. And what the next thing is. What is kind of your key message for athletes that are going through that transition? Because we all experience it. There's good, there's bad, there's everything in between.
Yeah.
But what's kind of your key messages they're looking to like make that transition?
My key message is that the best years of your life don't have to be behind you unless you let them. Mm. And that was one of my biggest fears, was like, I, at 23, had achieved this high level of success. I created this life that I loved. I loved everything about it. I loved working out. I loved training. I loved learning new tricks. I loved doing interviews and being a voice. I loved doing photo shoots. I loved writing. Yes. I loved traveling. I loved competing. I mean, I loved literally everything about it. And so in my head, initially, when I retired, I was like, well, you were fortunate to do that once, and now you're just going to have to suck it up and, enter the real world and get yourself a stable job and do the thing.
That sounds horrible, Jen.
It's so horrible. I tried.
You tried to force it. Didn't work. Yeah.
I tried to force it. I like ripped the Band-Aid off. I'm like, all right, we're doing this. And I'm so grateful that I did, because I learned a lot through going into the corporate world and dabbling with that and dabbling with the 9-to-5 thing and really starting to tease apart all the different elements of my career and what I truly liked about it, what was limited and isolated to my skiing career. So like the one thing that I cannot recreate, at least not all the time, is the intensity of that competitive environment.
Yes.
Like that maybe in something, but I can't right now see myself competing in anything else to bring that level. Amazing Race did that, but that also was kind of out of my control.
True.
But almost everything else I could keep doing. Like I could keep living my purpose, which in my ski career, I felt like I had this greater purpose of just showing people what was possible and being an example of following your dreams,
Yes.
which when I went corporate, I allowed that purpose to die because I
Yes.
thought that was associated and attached to my ski career. I didn't even give myself the opportunity to dream again because I was scared, because coming fresh off something that hurt so badly, such as in heavy air quotes, a failed dream,
Yes.
which I don't believe now was a failed dream. That Olympic dream propelled me to so much personal growth and to so much success. Like there's no way, like I didn't ever go to the Olympics to compete, but the Olympics are so much a part of my story still.
Yes.
And always will be.
Yes.
So I started piecing out, like teasing things out, like, okay, my purpose can live on in certain ways. I can still be a writer. I don't have to stop skiing. I can still be an athlete. I can still go take photos and be a content creator. I can still tell stories. I can still travel once I can figure out how to afford it.
Yes.
Or I can sell my house and my car and my personal possessions
Yes.
and decide to live a nomadic life if travel is so important to me. Like there's so many options.
Yes.
But I had kind of, wrapped everything into my ski career that without teasing all the pieces apart, it felt like everything at once was just like gone and needed to be rebuilt. And in many ways it did need to be rebuilt or reformulated. But like now it's so funny because all of the elements of what I loved in my ski career are still there. And I have a husband.
Yes.
And I can build a future. And I couldn't really, like skiing, if I kept staying in competitive skiing, it just, you knew where the end was going to take you, whether it was now or 4 years from now or 8 years from now, I knew what the end was going to be.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't even remember what your first question was, but
but it's so amazing though. Cause, when I think this is true of like any transition, cause it's, first of all, we're in more control than we think. And I think when you go into a corporate job, I experienced this too, like dreams kind of die and you just, I don't know, I had to get out as well.
Yeah.
And when you find out, when you have that realization that you have more control than you think, and that you can create this and craft this kind of life that feeds you the same way that maybe your sport did, or if you weren't into sports, that activity did, or like what those times when you're just feeling good about yourself, you're on that kind of high, you're in flow, like whatever that circumstance is, like you can recreate that. It looks different, it feels a bit different, but it's like this, it's the same driving force behind it, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, the one key thing, because I think when people hear this, they often think that you're saying that you can go out and create the exact result in the exact way and achieve the exact thing that you're setting out to. And I just want to be clear that that's not what I'm saying. Like, for example, the Olympics, I didn't create that into my life, like no matter how badly I want it. But we can find ways to create like the feeling of those things. And I recently was unpacking some of my trophies. My husband brought them down into our home gym and was like, we can put these up for inspiration. And I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit, but I'm like, that's very sweet.
Yes.
So I started unpacking them. And as I was setting them on like the windowsills, I'm just like, God, this is all kind of, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
This is all kind of a load of shit. Like I won the thing. Like I earned that trophy, but all these other pieces, like I didn't do it entirely by myself. And I know that there are hundreds of more athletes who went out and worked as hard and were dealt slightly different cards than me and don't have the trophy to show for it, but it doesn't make their effort and what they were doing any less worthwhile, and they shouldn't feel any less proud about it. And I feel like at the end of an athletic career, people are focusing on the trophies they didn't win instead of the trophies that they can almost give themselves, like those moments where you know that you did everything you absolutely could have to make something happen and it just wasn't in the cards, and being able to accept that and look at like how far having that dream brought you, and that dream led you into living this life that you loved. And that to me is the point of setting a goal or a dream, is like, who do you have to become if the stars magically aligned and you were doing all the work to achieve the result? And you don't get to control the stars magically aligning part, but you can control the how you show up part. And if you enjoy how you're showing up in pursuit of that goal, then that's a good goal for you.
I agree 100%. I think at the end of the day, I was just having this conversation with someone that, you know, I'm not necessarily going to regret like that I didn't get a trophy, that didn't happen. I'm going to regret that I didn't give my full effort and control like what I could have in that moment, which made me miss that goal, right? It's that effort and attitude that we have. I think that's so huge. I think you're right as well, because when we, you know, as athletes try to recreate something, I think to your point, we get that same feeling that, it'll look a bit different, feel a bit different, but there's still that core there that if you pay attention to like what you enjoyed and what gave you joy, right? Happiness, like when you were back in the day, you can get something similar to that. I mean, I look at just hearing you talk, like you've been on the Amazing Race, you finished top 3, right? Which is unreal. But I mean, with your ski career, you got to travel, you believe in something bigger than yourself. You've been able to carry that through, albeit a little bit different in what you do now, which is, it blows me away. I think the faster, and this is athletes and just individuals, that we have that power inside us. Like you can take advantage of that. It's huge.
Yeah. And the more you are willing to look at the ugly stuff, and the sooner you're willing to do that, the quicker you can move through it and really start creating a life that you enjoy and that you love, and not living from this fear-based place of, well, this is what I need to do in order to pay the bills. And, you know, and look back at your ski career, athletic career as, oh, that was nice once. Like, it's nice now. Like, it is amazing what athletes have done and what athletes do. It's incredible. And it's not accidental. And I think it's so easy to just dismiss, you know, their careers at the end of them. And it's like, you did this, like you were a part of all of this, and it's okay that it didn't all work out exactly as you had envisioned. Like nothing does, but you can go and set this whole new trajectory for your life. But you got to be able to make peace with it. You got to be able to forgive the entities that you feel have let you down. Like we got to stop with the self-pity. Like nobody owes us anything. The whole structure is totally flawed. Like all the external validation for athletes, like, and especially now with social media, when you get all this like attention when you're doing well, because the common person doesn't understand what it takes day in and day out to be an elite athlete and to achieve that level of success. And they don't realize you've been doing it for 10 years before you had that, you know, one breakthrough moment. They just see and then they pay attention to you. And then if you're not performing at that level, like they're, you know, they lose interest. They go, you know, they don't know. So we can't rely on them to validate our awesomeness. We gotta like just know.
It's that self-belief, knowing that we're enough, that we've done the best we can, and that's what's setting us up for a great life.
Yeah, that's where all the fun is anyways.
So true. So true.
The work you're doing.
Yeah, quicker we all realize that, the better, right? It's one of my missions to get these teenagers to understand this quick. Well, I know we've got just 2 minutes left, and a couple of things I want to point out, and again, we'll put, notes or kind of links to everything, your website and all that stuff. But one thing you mentioned at the beginning is what you call Act 2, and you've got this beta program rolling for retiring athletes, because that's obviously your passion, helping athletes transition and get to that next stage and stuff like that. Can you just talk for a minute about that Act 2?
Yeah, I would love to. So I created Act 2 because at the end of my athletic career, I felt like I didn't have the resources to successfully navigate that transition. And there were resources available from the sense of, resume building or college applications or, career mentorship and that sort of thing. But at the end of my career, I felt so lost and disconnected. My whole community was still going. I felt worthless. I felt like a failure. And I didn't feel like I had somebody that I could go to who really understood what this looked like and how it felt.
Yes.
And I am fortunate because I'm a person who kind of just opens up, and, I've been known to get into really deep, meaningful conversations with people on the plane to the point of like both of us crying on each other's shoulders. So I have no problem with this. And talking to other former athletes who had navigated the transition was one of the most beneficial components for me. Just being able to see like, okay, they retired. It was really hard for them too, but they're actually happy in their life now. Like I didn't believe I was going to find the same level of happiness in my life that I had in my ski career.
Yes.
And I can very happily say now that I was wrong. There is so much more after. So I developed Act 2 essentially to help athletes connect with other people that are going through a similar transition. We do a lot of work, like I had addressed, in teasing apart our athletic careers to find what our core values are and what that underlying purpose is that really was the driving motivator in our athletic careers, and do some creative thinking about how we can bring that to life in chapter 2, in the next act.
Yes.
So it's a group coaching program intentionally designed that way because I think that there is such a power in being able to have a team.
Yes.
And when you leave your athletic career, you also leave your team and they're still competing.
Yes.
So we're rebuilding that. I'm also bringing in some mentors, some former professional athletes who have navigated the transition and are doing very different things in their life. So some people who have gone the entrepreneur route, some people who have gone the corporate route, just so people can have an understanding, like there is no one answer, and but also to help manage the overwhelm, because athletes are hardworking and they know how to work hard and they can direct that energy somewhere. But if it's not in a place that is going to feel good to them, it just will lead to burnout.
Yes.
So essentially it's a 12-week coaching program for athletes who are retiring or looking to retire in the near future, and really trying to reconcile a lot of the emotional components in feeling like they're not enough. To look forward to the future.
Absolutely. And we'll put links, because I know you're accepting applications and getting that filled up now, for any of the athletes that you described that are listening today, or if you know of athletes kind of getting ready for that retirement or retiring that would want to join Act 2, please pass this podcast along in the link in the show notes as well. And
one other thing I'll note, I am currently launching the beta program. So what that looks like is it's launching for a smaller group initially at half the price, which means you'll get more one-on-one attention from me in the process. But these athletes are really going to help shape what the course looks like, because I know what worked for me. And now I kind of give them all the things, and we work together in this beta program to figure out like what were the real key takeaways to make it the best program out there. So that's what you'll be getting.
So get in the beta program, people.
Get in the beta program.
Goodness, Jen, I know I got to let you go. I don't want to, but I'm going to let you go.
No problem.
We're going to have to, I swear we're going to have to do a take 2, because we didn't touch on Amazing Race, which I'd love to dive into, like what you learned from that. And then you and your husband launched a company called Escapade, which are these teardrop camping trailers, which are freaking cool, by the way. I've been checking them out on the website. So you campers, outdoorsy folks, I'll put a link to escapade.com as well, so you can go check that out. But just so much that you've done just as an entrepreneur, as a skier, as a coach, launching this Act 2 beta program. And I know all the individual coaching and speaking and stuff that you do as well. So I just can't thank you enough for spending the last about hour with me and and for just sharing with the group here. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure, Matt.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Have a good
Thanks.
day. Bye.
Sweet.
Awesome.
You rock.